Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by Sam Payton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign. Sam, how are you this evening?
I'm fine, Kenny. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. And if you're wanting to get involved in the conversation at home, please do get on Twitter and use the hashtag Scotland at 7. We'd love to hear what you've got to say about all the stories we have tonight. So we start tonight with our usual coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 63,311 coronavirus tests concluded. Of these, 50,874 tests were confirmed negative and 12,437 tests were positive. 104 patients were in intensive care last night, with 91 of those having tested positive. And there were a total of 1,656 people in hospital with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19. This marks an increase of 171 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection has sadly risen to 1,620. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 29,427 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 693. Again, this only refers to those who have died in hospital following a positive test. And the United Kingdom has overtaken Italy to report the highest official death toll from coronavirus in Europe. Figures released today showed increasing pressure on Prime Minister Boris Johnson over his response to the crisis. Weekly figures from the Office for National Statistics added more than 7,000 deaths in England and Wales, raising the total for the whole UK to 32,313 as of late April. Only the United States has suffered more deaths than the UK, according to the data so far. Today's figures are based on death certificate mentions of COVID-19, the disease caused by the novel coronavirus, including suspected cases. While different ways of counting make comparisons with other countries difficult, the figures confirmed that Britain was among those hit worst by a pandemic that has killed more than 250,000 people worldwide. Total excess mortality, the number of deaths above the long-term average for this time of year, makes for clearer international comparisons, but these figures don't help the British government. ONS figures show excess deaths for the UK were running about 42,000 higher than average at this point in the year. Only about 80% of those excess deaths have been linked specifically with COVID-19, however. The overall decline in new cases and daily deaths also masked a worsening picture in care homes. The ONS said 7,911 deaths from all causes were registered in care homes in the week ending April 24th, 3 times higher than a month previously. And Sam, we've kind of been expecting these figures for some time, but this is the ONS confirming now that Britain is only just behind the US in terms of the total number of deaths from COVID-19. And I know this is something we always talk about this and how difficult it is to talk about, but what do you make of this, these figures from the ONS today?
It's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. We've spoke about it so many times that we kind of expected the UK to be kind of quite high numbers, and this just confirms it. And it's just all those families right now. It's just there's no really any words, is there? Really, Kenny? It's just heartbreaking. And the thing is where's Boris Johnson? He never gave the briefing today. He seems to have disappeared again. Where is he? He should have been standing at the podium today, announcing this and talking about this. So he's done another disappearing act, which is not very good. He's meant to be the one that's meant to be kind of leading the UK through this, and he's not doing that, which is it's wrong. It's just completely wrong. So it would be interesting to see what happens now, because I know there's been a lot of talk about easing the lockdown restrictions down in England. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of go forward with that, because I know with the Sir Patrick Vallance was saying today, they were talking about easing off some of the restrictions, but the R rate number is still quite high, 0.6 to 0.9, they reckon, in some parts of the UK. So I don't know how they're going to justify being able to ease off lockdown when the number is still quite high and with these figures. And I don't know how they're going to be able to justify, kind of doing a partial return to school for the kids as well with these figures. I don't know how they're going to be able to justify that. I could see a lot of parents coming around and saying they're not sending their kids back to school right now. This is where I'm quite happy we're up here in Scotland. And, our First Minister's got a lot more common sense and is, and dealing with this a lot more seriously. And today she was very clear that there'd be no easing the restrictions this week. And it's something they will continue to look at, but the R rate number's still sitting just a bit too high. So this is where I'm definitely glad that I'm living in Scotland, but for England at the moment it's kind of uncertain and how this is going to kind of what the future's going to hold. But yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. But we had a funny feeling that this was going to happen when once all the figures started to come in and started getting added on.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at the number of cases we have today, we have a story here about cases from a lot earlier than we first thought. The World Health Organization said today that a report that COVID-19 had emerged in December in France sooner than previously thought was not surprising and urged countries to investigate any other early suspicious cases. The disease, later identified as COVID-19, was first reported by Chinese authorities to the WHO on December 31st and was not previously believed to have spread to Europe until January. A French hospital which retested old samples from pneumonia patients discovered that it treated a man who had COVID-19 as early as December 27th, nearly a month before the French government confirmed its first cases. There is not currently any suggestion that the virus emerged from anywhere other than Wuhan, China. It is thought that instead, the French case was somehow connected to a person who travelled from there in December before the virus had been identified or reported by China, the World Health Organization spokesman said. However, the French patient, a fishmonger, is not thought to have a direct link to China, nor a history of recent travel, and experts say the French case requires more investigation. And this comes, we mentioned just before the show started, there have been similar early cases reported in parts of the US. One or two other countries, I think, have had similar suggestions that obviously need to be looked into. What do you make of this in with regard to the way that the information kind of dripped out of China, where they didn't even report that the virus existed until the end of December? It wasn't until mid-January they admitted that there was human-to-human transmission. And yet it certainly does seem that there was a human-to-human transmission in France before Christmas.
Well, this is my point of view on this, and it doesn't reflect Broadcasting Scotland's point of view in any shape or form. It looks as if, and China's not done themselves any favours in this, that there's possibly they've tried to not so much cover it up, maybe hide. Maybe they thought that they had it under control, or maybe they were frightened of the publicity. I don't know, but it seems to be where you kind of look back, and even at the time when we seen this happening, there was a lot more to this than what was coming out of China. I believe Taiwan had tried to report human-to-human transmission before China did, and the World Health Organization took China's word of their scientists over Taiwan scientists. So there seems to be, but I think there'll be time for all these to scrutinise and investigate all these. But yeah, as you said, before the show we were kind of having a quick blather about this. I know on social media I've seen doctors from various parts of the world saying that they believe that they've dealt with COVID-19 Months leading up to December, round about October, November, December. Obviously, all this needs to be confirmed properly through the right channels and investigated. So it would be interesting. But it just goes to show you, going by the report, that has been confirmed that there has been human-to-human transmission longer than what we expected. Which will explain a lot of things, because a lot of people do believe, with the COVID symptoms, that it's been in communities for a wee bit longer than what the governments are admitting to.
Yeah. We've also seen Mike Pence, the American vice president, who's been kind of one of the leaders of the American response to this, saying that they now have evidence that the virus came from the bio lab that we've heard a lot of talk about in Wuhan. Yeah. What do you make of that announcement? Do you think that's true? Do you think that's Pence just trying to put a bit of pressure on China, maybe trying to get them to admit to something, or do you think that is the likeliest explanation for all this?
Right. Basically, my own
difficult question. I appreciate
in this is I do believe it's been a natural virus, but it's been manipulated and enhanced. Because going by everybody I've spoken to, friends within the medical profession and various different other scientific fields, they've all said the same. It doesn't behave like a natural occurring virus. So that's when the brain starts going and you start thinking, right, there's something more to this. Yes, it may have, COVID-19 probably started off as a natural virus, but it may have been enhanced artificially in the labs. And, the way it's behaving is a bit strange. And also as well, the way the government's behaved towards this virus. Because we've had viruses before and things that the governments have not panicked quite as bad. So that makes me kind of wonder as well. But then again, it could be just my conspiracy theory brain kind of working overtime. Well, I'm sure we'll soon find out. I would like to think we would soon find out. But yeah, I kind of do agree that it's being kind of worked on from a lab, really.
Well, we have no evidence to prove that. Obviously,
no
if any evidence does come to light, I'm sure you'll hear it first here on Broadcasting Scotland. We will keep looking into that, obviously, but I think it might just be beyond our investigation powers right now to get any concrete proof ourselves. We do move on though, and a substantial majority of people around the world want their governments to prioritise saving lives over moves to restart economies that are being hammered by measures aimed at halting the spread of the new coronavirus, a global survey has found. The latest findings of the Edelman Trust Barometer, which for 2 decades has polled tens of thousands of people on their trust in core institutions, challenge the notion that lockdown fatigue is rising among populations hit by the pandemic. Overall, 67% of the 13,200 plus people interviewed between April 15th and April 23rd agreed with the statement, the government's highest priority should be saving as many lives as possible, even if it means the economy will recover more slowly. Just 1/3 backed the assertion, it is becoming more important for the government to save jobs and restart the economy than to take every precaution to keep people safe. The study, produced by US communications company Edelman, was based on fieldwork carried out in Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Japan, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, the UK and the US. 76% of Japanese respondents agreed that public health should be prioritised over the economy, against just 56% in China, where the outbreak was first detected late last year. China now has only a handful of new cases each day after imposing a strict lockdown earlier than most countries. In Canada, the UK and France, 70% or more of the respondents were in favour of prioritising health concerns. In the US, where anti-lockdown protests in some cases were encouraged by President Donald Trump, the figure was 66%. And Sam, I think this is probably the strongest evidence we could have that, as we said in the story, people are not necessarily itching to get back to work if they think that the virus hasn't been suppressed enough. Does this surprise you at all?
No, it doesn't surprise me. I think people accept, this is one, to stop transmission, that, we need to kind of abide by these restrictions. And people would rather save lives than go out and earn a quid. Do you know what I mean? To put it that kind of bluntly, people would rather save lives. And I'm not surprised, because nobody wants to lose a loved one. And, lives are a lot more important than going out to work, really. You want your family to be safe, you want your loved ones to be safe. So yeah, I'm not surprised that most people feel the same way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you look at some of the other impacts of the lockdown, though, when you think about kind of increases in loneliness and depression, potentially increases in suicide, as well as what we've talked about a number of times with people not presenting with symptoms of other illnesses, how far do you think we need to be working on that if we are going to kind of maintain lockdown for longer? Do you think there needs to be some new efforts put into protecting people's health while lockdown, from the effects of lockdown?
Yeah, we do. We certainly do. Whether it's talking about the socialisation bubble or all the other kind of wonderful things that are going around at the moment, people need to be able to get outside. People need to be, so even if it's just picking one other, each household, for instance, if it was my household and my son's household, and we were allowed to come together, even just having people being able to do that would make such an impact on people's mental health, because my oldest son lives on his own. Mm-hmm. So if he was able to come here, for his dinner, even just once a week, it would make such an impact in his life and in our lives as well, instead of just making phone calls all the time. So things like that, which are not, and it's been able to ensure that these are not going to be open to abuse, so to speak, but people just being sensible and just being able to get outside, and maybe having another household that, making it very still strict, that that these people can maybe visit one other, household, just so that people can, because we, as human beings, we are naturally social beings, or animals, which we are. So we need that socialisation for our mental health. They need to do something, even if they just turn around and say to people, not necessarily people who have got multiple occupants in the house, but people who live on their own, allow them, there's got to be something to allow them to be able to get outside. There's got to be, and to be able to meet up with other people for that social contact. Yeah,
absolutely. And once again, we do just remind you that if you do have any symptoms of anything, please remember that your GP is still available and accident and emergency is still available. There were accident emergency statistics published today showing that the throughput there is still very smooth. If you have a condition that you're worried about, then please do get in touch with the NHS. There is capacity there to treat you. And in general, if you're going in to get something looked at in a hospital, you're going to be kept separate from where the coronavirus patients are. So your risk of getting infected is very low. But please, we do all have to look after ourselves and look after each other while we are in lockdown. So if you do have any concerns, please remember the NHS is still open. At Westminster, though, Ian Blackford MP has called on opposition parties to support an extension to the Brexit transition period to help protect the economy while the country deals with the coronavirus pandemic. In a letter to opposition leaders, the SNP's Westminster leader said, "The ongoing emergency caused by the COVID-19 virus is, and must remain, the sole focus of our collective efforts, and it is right that all other political agendas are paused as we deal with the priority of saving lives and protecting people's incomes." He continued, "In that context, I believe now is the right moment to unite as opposition parties in Westminster in seeking a 2-year extension to the Brexit transition period. That strong, united opposition stance would also send a powerful message to our European friends and partners, who we know are favourable to the logic and sense of this request." Mr Blackford has argued that the UK government wants to impose a disastrous hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit at the worst possible time. At Prime Minister's questions last week, Mr Blackford said threatening to impose Brexit in the middle of a global pandemic would damage jobs, businesses and the economy. He called for the UK government to embrace common sense and agree to a 2-year extension. And this is something, again, Sam, that we've talked about this a number of times. There has to be a Brexit, there has to be an agreement to extend that by June if we're going to get any extension past the end of December, which is really, at the moment, a hard limit, at which point we would leave without a deal and nothing really in place to mop up the mess. Do you get the sense that there might be some movement particularly from Labour on this, when they have been they were kind of resistant to sounding too pro-EU under Corbyn, but Keir Starmer was one of the voices in the party who was calling for a much more pro-EU stance. Do you think we might see any sort of cooperation between the opposition parties on this?
I think we may, because at the moment we're in kind of sticky ground with COVID, and coming out of the EU and having what possibly will be a no deal is just diabolical. It's full blazing guns ahead without any sense of the consequences at the other side. So yeah, I think there would be. I think anybody with a bit of common sense, I would like to think that Labour and the other parties will actually join together and put some pressure on the government. But I think the problem is with the Tories is they've got a one-track mind and they're just full steam ahead, and I really don't see them backing down, because I think this is the perfect excuse for them for a no deal, and then they can blame it all on COVID at a later date. That's my opinion, I'm afraid. Not very rosy and a bit bleak, but I just think, they're going to steam full guns ahead.
Well, we do have another story that's somewhat linked, so we'll see how positive you can feel about this one. The UK and United States today launched trade negotiations by video conference, with both sides keen to weaken the EU and China, but with very different objectives from the trade talks themselves. The talks will be Washington's first major new trade negotiation in 2020, and they begin with the UK already struggling to keep pace with talks to finalise a Brexit deal before the end of the year. US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer has said little publicly about the talks since publishing a sweeping set of objectives more than a year ago that sought full access for US agricultural products and reduced tariffs for US manufactured goods. Agriculture is expected to be among the thorniest issues in the talks, given the strong British opposition to US genetically modified crops, chlorinated chicken and hormone-boosted beef. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has vowed to drive a hard bargain, and UK International Trade Secretary Liz Truss has said that Britain would not diminish its food safety standards. There have also been fears in the UK that US healthcare companies may lobby aggressively for access to the NHS, which could open the door to increased privatisation. And Sam, as I said, this does link in obviously with the Brexit talks that are struggling to even happen right now. The EU openly says it's not really got the capacity to keep up the talks at the pace that they feel is necessary. The UK government, we know, was not well prepared to start trade negotiations with the EU and has not handled the negotiation period well throughout the last 3.5 years. And now they're taking on this huge negotiation with the US in the middle of a coronavirus crisis. Do you have any hopes that this negotiation will get anywhere at all, much less that it'll get us a good deal?
Let's hope it doesn't get us anywhere, because we don't really want a trade deal with America. with the pharmaceutical companies and, the agricultural, we don't really want that here at all. I mean, I certainly don't want genetically modified food and things, and I certainly don't want to see the NHS up for sale either, which I think will be part of the deals with the UK. Unfortunately, this is one of the reasons I believe that they are kind of trying to push ahead with the no deal with Europe. It's so they can forge ahead with these deals with America. And people are not as susceptible to the trade deals with America. So I think it's a way of kind of, we can't get a deal with Europe, so we'll need to do a deal with. And I just think, we know fine well if the deal goes ahead with America, it basically involves privatisation of the NHS, and which is something we really do not want at all. Never mind, the kind of genetically modified foods that are going to end up flooding our supermarket shelves.
And when you look at these big trade negotiations, one of the things that we've talked about a lot, we've had this gigantic financial or economic shrink by 35%, 2 million jobs potentially lost in the UK. And as we start to rebuild, it seems likely that things are going to look different one way or another. What effect do you think that has on these trade talks, where we might be negotiating all year with the EU and the US, and yet when we come out of the coronavirus crisis, we may find that all three economies look very different? How difficult is it going to be, do you think, to kind of manage that process in the heads of the negotiators while these negotiations are going on?
Well, that's a good question, because it seems to be what they're doing is they're negotiating trade deals based on the economy that was, or what was pre-COVID-19. The economy's not going to be like that anymore. The world's not going to be like that anymore. A lot of people are already seeing COVID-19 as a way of, yes, we need to restart the economy, but in different ways. A healthier, greener, way of. So it could be that they could go and do all these trade negotiations, and but it could be that the end result might not be what these negotiators want. Sorry, I'm trying to get the words out there. The brain's not kind of working quite as well. So it's very difficult, because then because the public might not want them. Because if the public's, because what's happening at the moment, as we all see, there's less pollution, we're seeing more wildlife, and people are enjoying the fact that there's definitely a lot less pollution. So it could be that, once the economy starts to restart again, public are a bit more got more of a voice to say, no, we don't want that to go back, we don't want this and we don't want that. And this is what they need to do. But the problem is with the UK government, as we all witness, they live in the past. They don't have a kind of really good kind of view of the future, everything's about the past, when Britain was this and, and all that kind of stuff.
Make Britain great again.
The nonsense, so and again with these trade negotiations, whether it's with the EU or with America, it seems to be they're still focusing on pre-COVID-19 instead of afterwards.
Yeah. Well, to a very different part of the world, and television screens tuned into the Philippines' biggest broadcaster, ABS-CBN, went blank this evening after the network was forced off air by a cease and desist order that has been condemned as a brazen attack on press freedom. The media group, which has been repeatedly attacked by the country's president, Rodrigo Duterte, has faced months of uncertainty over its future. An application to renew its franchise, a requirement in order to continue operations, had been delayed in Congress. It had been expected that the network would be allowed to continue broadcasting during the coronavirus lockdown, when access to reliable information is crucial to public health. Millions of people living in the country's capital and major cities remain under quarantine measures until at least mid-May. Earlier today, though, the network went off air just before 8 p.m. local time, following the decision by the country's telecoms body, the National Telecommunications Commission. Its 25-year congressional franchise ended on Monday. Danilo Arao, a journalism professor at the University of the Philippines, said the order was likely to have a chilling effect on journalism in the country. The government has hated ABS-CBN right from the very start, but somehow we were expecting that it would not be so brazen, given the need for timely information. ABS-CBN, hate it or not, you cannot discount that its reach is very, very far in terms of its listenership and viewership, said Arao. This will send a strong message to other journalists and news media organisations that if you continue with critical reportage, or even if you are at the crosshairs of the powers that be, you might end up like ABS-CBN. And Sam, we talked, it was World Press Freedom Day just a couple of days ago, and now, as this report says, in the middle of a crisis when people need access to information, the Philippines government has chosen to shut down their biggest broadcaster, apparently for being critical of the president. What do you make of this announcement?
Well, the thing is, it doesn't matter if you're in government or you are what position in the world you're in. You've got to be open to criticism, and you've got to be able to handle criticism and deal with it. Not all criticism is a bad thing. You can learn from criticism. And I think this is one of the things with some governments around the world, that they do not like to hear criticism, which in terms of governments, I think governments have got a lot to learn, and journalists have got to be able to ask the questions that the public are not able to, because they're the voice of the public. They've got to be able to, say if the public are, a bit unhappy in the ground, about certain policies and things, which it's the journalists you trust to hold the governments and the powers be to account and ask the questions. And if that means being a wee bit critical on air, then the governments have just got to deal with that. And I think, but that's just a form of, shutting down freedom of speech because somebody doesn't agree with your point of view. And yeah, we do see it from time to time again around the world with various governments and press outlets where there is restrictions put on them. And we, as much as we may not always agree with press or media input or output, they have got a right to, as long as the story is truthful and the story represents fact, then they have got a right to report on that story, and that includes being, say, if they don't agree with what the government's doing. And I think it's very irresponsible, especially during the coronavirus outbreak, because a lot of people will be using that station as a form, for their sources and their information. So I think it's very irresponsible of the government, and I hope they change their mind very quickly and allow them to go back on air.
Absolutely, yeah. And we do, of course, send our solidarity to our fellow journalists out there. It's never good to be silenced, especially, as we said, when there's such a major crisis going on. So we do hope for the very best outcome there in the Philippines. Back in Britain, though, the SNP has pressed the UK government to urgently fix the unacceptable two-tier system in the personal independence payment process that is seeing people who have gone through the tribunal process losing out on desperately needed support. SNP MP Anne McLaughlin has raised gaps in the process where people who were turned down for PIP but were then awarded it after going to a tribunal would not receive the 3-month extension, cutting off support amid a health pandemic and lockdown measures. The DWP recently announced that those in receipt of PIP, the benefit intended to help adults with the extra costs of a long-term health condition, could see it extended by 3 months, as there will be no assessments taking place due to the coronavirus pandemic. Anne McLaughlin, the SNP MP for Glasgow North East, said the coronavirus pandemic has had a devastating impact across society, but it will be especially felt by those who are in need of further support and help to get by. While it is welcome that the DWP has stopped assessments and extended PIP by 3 months, there are still very serious gaps being raised in the system that is resulting in vulnerable people losing out. It's unacceptable that there are reports of a two-tier system in the process where someone who was turned down for PIP but was then awarded it after going to a tribunal would not get the 3-month extension, cutting off vital support at a time when they need it the most. People already had to fight for what turned out to be their legal entitlement. It cannot be the case that they are singled out and treated differently again. The UK government must urgently look to fix this flaw to protect those people who have found themselves in a position of losing out through no fault of their own. And Sam, this ties into a story that we've talked about once or twice before, where the actual rate of success on these tribunal appeals is very, very high. People who go through the appeals process very often find that their case was mistakenly denied in the first place. They get the award, but then they're finding now that they're not getting this 3-month extension that they would have got had they already been on PIP. What do you make of this discovery that Anne McLaughlin's made?
It's absolutely diabolical. I should say it surprises me, but it doesn't. It's the Tory government. They're always, it's always the most vulnerable that they seem to find the easiest to target. And once again, it's the most vulnerable in society that are suffering. It's just shocking. We all know, and I know people that have been in the same position, not the position with us currently, but where they've been refused the kind of higher rate of PIP and they've got to go to a tribunal. And it is absolutely heartbreaking to watch, because this is people who have genuinely got long-term health issues, and the stress that's added on because of this is just unbelievable. And this especially, and now you've got COVID-19 added into that factor, is just, the Tory government are just not for making things easy for people at all. Unless you are a certain person of society, I suppose, but when it comes to vulnerable people, they're not for making it easy. You've got to jump through hoops plus some. And this is a time where people need the extra support, especially, people that have got long-term health conditions. It doesn't surprise me, and I hope they manage to get this sorted out. I really do. Yeah,
absolutely. And once again, just like to remind you, if you would like to comment on any of these stories, you can do so on Twitter using the hashtag Scotland@7. We'd always love to hear from you. But moving on again, a new report published today has revealed that an estimated 60,000 families will be affected by the 2-child limit as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, and 2 million children are likely to be subject to the limit by the end of this Parliament, prompting the SNP to renew calls for the policy and the associated rape clause to be scrapped. The report by the Child Poverty Action Group and the Church of England shows that since the 2-child cap came into effect in April 2017, which sees families having a third or subsequent child no longer entitled to additional support through child tax credit and universal credit worth over £50 per week, 230,000 families have been negatively impacted by it. It warns that if the policy, condemned by the UN Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, is not lifted, over 600,000 families and 2 million children in the UK are likely to be affected by the end of the Parliament, pushing 1.3 million children into or deeper into poverty. The Child Poverty Action Group has previously argued that if you set out to design a policy that was targeted to increase child poverty, then you could not do much better than the 2-child limit. And Sam, this is something the SNP have, and particularly Alison Thewlis, the Glasgow Central MP, have made this a crusade ever since it was first introduced in 2017. And now we're seeing this report is we could see 1.3 million children pushed either into or deeper into poverty as a result of this by the end of the Parliament. Do you think this message is getting through to people? Do you think people on the ground are angry enough about this to make an issue of it? Given that I suspect I know what you'll say about the Tories' likelihood of changing their minds on it.
I don't think a lot of people have really kind of clicked yet. I think especially, well, up here in Scotland, yeah, we're quite aware, but I think in other parts of the UK, a lot of people have not maybe kind of clicked yet about the system, the two-child cap. And I think once they do, especially at the moment with unemployment and things like that, because we're in lockdown, people are so focused on the kind of lockdown scenario and things. I think once the kind of restrictions start to ease and we see the truer figure of unemployment and people claiming benefits and things like that, you will notice it more. And I think people will get quite angry and they're quite right to. And I think it's just absolutely disgusting. It's a disgusting policy. It really is. There is no words that, this is families, this is people, this is, children it affects. These children are going to grow up and be major contributors towards our society. So therefore, we nourish them, we look after them, we educate them, we look after their mental well-being and their health. That's our jobs, so they can then carry on. And I just think it's disgusting. Absolutely. Yeah. And why people voted the Tories back in December, I don't know. Just...
Yeah. I mean, as I said, this has been one of Alison Thulis's big campaigning points ever since 2017 when it was first introduced. We do hope to have Alison back on the show again to talk about it sometime soon. But as the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, she is very busy at the moment. So as I say, we will hopefully talk to her again soon about that, though. A programme for government commitment to ensure everyone experiencing homelessness has access to suitable quality accommodation has been brought forward in response to the coronavirus outbreak. The unsuitable accommodation order, which currently prohibits local councils from placing pregnant women or families with children into bed and breakfasts or hotels for more than 7 days, will now be extended to all homeless households. Housing Minister Kevin Stewart said there has been a remarkable cross-sector response during the COVID-19 crisis, with emergency accommodation and support quickly given to those that need it most. Extending the unsuitable accommodation order, a homelessness and rough sleeping action group recommendation, will provide people with quality accommodation to support their move on from homelessness. It is vital we protect the progress made and ensure there is no backwards movement in local and national efforts to tackle homelessness in the aftermath of the pandemic. We will work with local authorities to overcome any barriers they face as we move towards a new way of dealing with homelessness. We know hotel and B&B accommodation is being used during the current public health emergency to ensure there is physical distancing and ability to self-isolate, vital to suppressing the spread of the virus. So the initial legislation will be time limited to ensure no local authority is in breach of the order whilst they're protecting people during the pandemic. And Sam, again, this is another one that we've had some discussion about homelessness on the show before, but it does show, I think, how quickly homelessness can be addressed if there is the political will to do it, because most people who were sleeping on the streets, who were sleeping rough recently in the UK, have now been found a roof over their heads, because we don't want them to become kind of harbingers of the disease. What do you make of this from Kevin Stewart?
Yeah, it just as you said, it just goes to show that, through a crisis, things can be done, and very welcomed. So, it's homelessness is it's always a tough one, because people are homeless for many reasons. There are so many reasons that people are homeless, whether it's relationship breakdown, work, health reasons. There's so many reasons. Substance abuse. And it's one of these issues that or problems that doesn't have a quick and easy answer. But it just goes to show you during a crisis, a bit of people getting together, it can be not resolved as such, but things can be put in place. And I would like to see that continues, and people actually deal with the core roots of homelessness. It's okay dealing with the solution, but they need to deal with the cause of why people become homeless, and maybe we need to kind of look more into that. In terms of living in hostels and things like that with children, it's not ideal. It's really not ideal. Or B&Bs and things, but sometimes people have no choice. That's the thing, people have no choice. Or even couch surfing as well. There's all different. People seem to think that homelessness is just people that are sleeping rough on the street, but there's all different levels of homelessness as well. Just people not knowing where they're going to be sleeping from day to day, whether it's in their car and things. So, yeah, I would like to see a kind of an approach more to deal with the causes of, looking into more of the causes of homelessness and giving people more support, because I know that when there's been a couple of people kind of tried to get help or get them a roof over their head, and when you try to do things like that, what happens is a lot of the local authorities just think, well, yeah, we've got a place in a hostel, but the hostel or the B&B place or, might not be a safe place for that person. Yeah. So that person, depending on the circumstances, that person might be safer sleeping rough on the street, and trying to get through to the authorities and the people behind these situations to explain, because their thinking is, well, we're giving them a bed for the night, we're giving them a roof over their head, they should take it. If they don't take it, then they're refusing help. Yeah. No, they're not refusing help. That they don't view that as a safe space, and it's not help to them. Yeah, it's changing the mentality of how we deal with homelessness. It's okay giving somebody a roof over their head and a bed to sleep on, but it needs to be a safe space. Yeah, absolutely. And looking at another issue in the housing sector, a £5 million fund will offer interest-free loans to landlords whose tenants are having difficulty paying rent during the coronavirus crisis. The private rent sector landlord COVID-19 loan scheme will offer eligible landlords up to 100% of lost rental income for a single property. It will support private sector landlords who are not classified as businesses, have 5 or less properties to rent, and have lost rental income due to tenants unable to pay rent as a result of the pandemic. So this is another Scottish Government fund here to help private landlords. And, we often demonise landlords, but obviously there are people who, have maybe bought a house and used the rental income as the pension, for example. And a lot of these people are the kinds of people that this particular fund targets. What do you think about this? And is this the right move for the government to make to support that sector of the economy? It's a difficult one, isn't it, Kenny? Because it's a loan. So these these property owners, and we're talking about people that maybe just own 1 or 2 properties, and as you say, it's just maybe support. It's a kind of nest egg. It's not necessarily, the kind of big property developers as such. These people, yes, it's very nice and very courteous and polite to say, here's an interest-free loan, but however, they've still got to find the money to pay that loan back. And, if they've lost revenue through their tenant unable to pay due to being furloughed or, or whatever reasons, they've still got to find the money to pay the money back, the loan back, no matter what. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to help. It may put some people into more debt. I don't know. It would need to be assessed on an individual basis. I know the Scottish Government can't give everyone grants. It's impossible. They can't do that to everybody. But it's one of the sectors I think that's going to be hit quite hard.
Yeah.
And I think, and there's going to be, I wouldn't like to see what the kind of end result of this is.
Yeah.
If it's going to be a result in property owners then selling off their property, then thus making people homeless.
Yeah.
Because I know of one family that's already happened to at the beginning of this lockdown. We were 2 weeks into the lockdown. The property that they were private letting that they've lived in for 8 years was suddenly sold, and they were given a week's notice to move out and go and find another property. And that was a mum with kids. So these things are happening. So it's these have got to be taken by individual cases, I suppose.
And would you like to see, if that sort of thing does happen, do you think that the local authorities should be buying those houses up? If people are trying to sell quickly homes that have been used as private rental properties, should the local authority be buying those properties up and turning them into effectively new council houses?
In an ideal world, yes. And that's what I would like to see. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of local authorities and councillors out there going, we can't afford it, we've not got the budget. So it's a difficult one. Where it's possible, yeah, definitely. Whether in reality it can work, I don't know.
Yeah.
It depends on the local authorities' finances and whether they can afford to do that. I really can't answer that one, Kenny, with a straight answer.
Well, we will move on then to our last story of the evening, and the second phase of the Small Business Grant Scheme, which extends grant support to all subsequent eligible properties, is now open for applications, Finance Secretary Kate Forbes has told the Scottish Parliament. Ms Forbes also announced a review to examine how Scotland's tech industry can help the economy recover. The second phase of the Small Business Grant Scheme ensures that in addition to existing grants of £10,000 or £25,000 for the first property, businesses may now qualify for grants of £7,500 or £18,750 on all subsequent eligible premises. In addition, retail, hospitality and leisure properties with a rateable value up to £18,000 that do not qualify for the Small Business Bonus Scheme may now qualify for small business grants. These enhancements, announced in April, are worth an estimated £120 million extra to businesses in Scotland. Giving an update to the Scottish Parliament, Ms Forbes announced a new short life review led by former Skyscanner Chief Operating Officer Mark Logan to make recommendations on how Scotland's thriving tech industry can help with economic recovery. She also reaffirmed the Scottish Government's commitment to pass on the latest £155 million of consequentials to local government in full, and called for the Scottish Parliament to be given additional fiscal powers to help address the challenges facing Scotland's economy. And Sam, this was a section of the support being given to businesses that was slightly different in England. A change was made in England, and then Kate Forbes and the Scottish Government had to kind of catch up after getting criticised for not doing exactly what England had done. What do you make of the Scottish Government's response to the crisis generally, first in terms of the financial packages they've offered?
I think they've done, from my personal point of view, I think they've done actually a good job. They've tried to cover majority of businesses, right down to the self-employed and the creative industries as well. From somebody that's self-employed, I'm still waiting to find out if I qualify. I've put in my applications, so we'll wait and see. But I think they've done in such a short space of time. They've done not bad, especially for the self-employed and the smaller businesses. Whereas, and I know it's going to be impossible to help everyone and support everyone. I know that, but they are trying. Whereas with the UK government, their attitude is absolutely stinking when they were asked about, there's going to be self-employed and things, and it was a case of, there'll be ones that'll slip through the cracks, but hey, that kind of attitude, and it's just So yeah, I know a lot of people have criticised the Scottish Government, but I think under the circumstances they've done no too bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's a challenging situation given that the Scottish Government doesn't necessarily have money to spend willy-nilly. It has to look at things like what consequentials are coming through. It's only got a relatively small financial reserve. And of course now it's taking in a lot less income tax, which is the one tax that the Scottish Government does collect now, and it's not collecting nearly as much income tax. It's going to make a lot of calculations for the Barnett formula and all that going forwards really quite complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It really is. We've got kind of, as much as we all kind of are wanting help, everybody's wanting help and everybody's wanting loans and grants and things, I still think that it would have been better off for the UK government to put a universal basic income in place for everybody right across the board. I think it would have been more beneficial to the economy, and it would be more beneficial to individual people and to small businesses and larger businesses as well. If they just made, they just put that in play, it would have just made life so much easier.
That would have helped people pay their rent as well.
Yeah, it would have just made life so much easier. Whereas I think that people having to apply for all these grants and loans and things, all the manpower, it's costing money, all these man hours, it costs money. So, I think, the Scottish Government can considering they are limited in what they can do, have done not too bad. But I think the UK Government, if there was a lot easier way to do this, and they just refused to do it. Yeah. And I think it would have been, what they've done is they've cost themselves money in the long run, or effectively cost the taxpayer money in the long run, because what's going to happen is we're going to get hit with the bill down the line from this. How things are going to, once lockdown starts to ease off, how it's going to work. But no, it'll be interesting to see. But I still think universal basic income for everybody would have solved a lot of problems very quickly and made life a lot easier right across the board. It wouldn't have solved all problems. There would still be issues. There would be still people, put the loans and grants there, as additional support. But I think a universal basic income from the start would have just
that's
a lot easier.
Perfect note for us to end on. Our friend of the show, Ronnie Cowan MP, I know he was speaking to the Backbench Committee at Westminster today, hopefully trying to arrange a universal basic income debate in Parliament. So we will obviously keep an eye out for that coming up. But as I said, that is all we've got time for tonight. We'd like to thank Sam for joining us, of course. It's always a pleasure to have her. And we'd like to thank you as well. As we always say, the reason we make these shows is for the audience. So if you are able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter, and your £5 a month can make a huge difference to what we're able to do here. But we would also please encourage you to spread the word about Broadcasting Scotland. That really is the biggest thing you can do for us right now. We want to grow our audience as much as we can. And the best way we can do that is by you recommending us to somebody else. So find somebody, a friend, a family member, even somebody you don't like if you think we're that bad, and spread the word. Let them know what Broadcasting Scotland is. Tell them to give us a watch. Ask them to let us know what they think. Again, follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, and you can tweet at us with Scotland at 7. Let us know what you think of the shows, and that all helps us to build a bit of attention for the shows. That's how we're going to build this audience and become the kind of broadcaster that we think Scotland deserves. That is, as I said, all we've got time for tonight. Please do join us tomorrow night when we will have an exclusive story. We have some exclusive news to broadcast tomorrow, which is very exciting for us. So please do tune in for that. I'll be back for that. And then, of course, Gordon will be back on Thursday. But until then, I'd like to thank Sam once again. And to you at home, thanks again for joining us. I've been Kenny McBride. Have a great evening.